So welcome everybody to this week's Lore Chat. Today is Saturday, January 15th. It's the Lore Chat for the week of Sunday, January 9th. This week's topic is going to be all about the Vahi. The Vahi people, the people of the East. We'll be more or less going over the kinds of things that you would see in the player's handbook if you were to read about them as a race. That is to say, we'll go over their physical description, some of their traits, their adventuring motivations, their naming, kind of their nomenclature. Then we'll also go into kind of a brief overview of the race as well, their origin, where they came from, a little bit about their history. And then once we've talked over all that, we'll talk a little bit more about their modern sociology and culture, including their kind of current systems of governance and institutions. So it's more or less the order that we'll cover everything in. It's a little different than what you might see in the book, but it's just because many of the races of Athros, anyways, their culture is closely tied in with their history. So it's usually better to talk about that before going into their culture and governance. All right. So just diving in here, the Vahi people, you can see here, well, I guess let me share my screen with all the folks in the Discord so that they can see what's going on as well here. Hence the pause. Well, that'll be showing you guys my entire OBS here. It's alright. You guys can just live without a screen share. There's nothing really important going on except me putting up the map and pointing to different places. So for those of you who are watching live right now, if you want, you can go to Lore Links, pull up the map there, and you'll be right on point with what I'm about to do. Alright, but I'm taking this little symbol of the Vahikana down and pulling up the map. So we're going to talk a little bit first about the physical description of the Vahi. They're tall, generally of slighter build. I guess tall for a D&D race, right? They'd be between about 5'8" and 6 foot. They have powerful and lean seafaring bodies that are capable of guiding their sleek outriggers through even the toughest of storms. So they're seafarers by nature, and that shows in their bodies. Their complexion ranges anywhere from a deep earthen tone to a lighter kind of, but still slightly orange-red, just a little tint to the skin. Their eyes shine with joy, typically, and the sacred fire that burns inside their hearts. They have a lot in common with the Polynesian cultures of Earth. Their material culture reflects an intimacy with the natural world and its simple beauty. So you'll kind of see that often expressed in their art. They have a deep sense of culture and tradition, especially on the islands. And the Vahi decorate almost every object that they can lay their hands on with jagged black and red designs. And these designs often reflect family, tribe, occupation, or an order, perhaps like the Ikaika or Vahikana. There are also certain Vahi that, after intense meditation, were able to connect with the nature of fire itself and gain an elemental fortitude, and this would be shown on their skin as a sort of like a burning ember, I guess a coat of burning embers, it looks like, is over their skin. So that's a little bit about them physically. As far as their traits, most Vahi don't live past 200. They return their body to the earth and let their spirit return to the sacred fires of Manalo before then. Although some do find magical means to forestall the inevitable and could live up to twice that long. But 200 is generally a ripe old age for a Vahi. As far as their disposition, most Vahi, those that follow Kane, live with joy in their hearts, and they enlighten the spirits of those around them. There are, however, those who worship Kaho Ali and follow the Maki, who live with greed in their eyes and are much more withdrawn and act a little nastier than devout kin. But no matter whether they worship Kane or Kahawali, Vahi of all kind tend to worship the sun and the sacred fire. So, the magma and the heat that dwells in volcanoes. They tend to draw their power and their magic, their energy, from warmth and from fire. All right. So adventuring motivations. Why are Vahi going out there? Why are they doing what they do? Kane, their creator god, blessed them with a desire to go and sail, to go and colonize, to leave their home isles and see what's out there. So joy in their hearts. They savor life and the multitude of experiences it has to offer. They want to go and see what's out there, to enjoy life, to live it to the fullest. Carpe diem. By going out there and exploring more, they're able to participate fully with the world and interact with more of what is out there. The world with a capital W. So the divine world. They can sing more of the song of creation if they know more of creation. So some good adventuring motivations for Vahi there. And then their nomenclature. It follows Polynesian nomenclature pretty closely as far as the names themselves. The roots of the names, or what they mean, usually they are inspired by the beauty of the natural world, their fiery passions and devotion, or their mastery of sea and sail. And you can find a full list of these examples on the Vahi D&D Beyond page, and you'll see that they line up with those idioms pretty closely. All right, so now an overview of the Vahi, kind of from start to finish. Where did they come from? How did they make you? We do know. So, fire in earth, that is the literal translation of what Vahi means in ancient Thuppish. Fire in earth. And it goes back to the Vahi's creation myth. It says that about 7,000 first era, so this would be about 9,500 or so years ago, almost 10,000 years ago. Kane surveyed his empty domains, and he desired to see them filled with joy and songs. So he collected rocks from the sacred lava of Manalo and shaped the pliable stones into the form of man and woman. He sang the magical words of creation to them and breathed fire from his own spirit into them. And they woke and began to move around their world. But they were still small and fragile, and plus Kane had forgotten to give them mouths. Even though he wanted to see the world filled with songs, he somehow forgot that part. So he decided to give them the gift of a singing heart. He gathered select individuals of them and taught them the ancient songs of creation and the words that could shape the world around them simply with song. They learned quickly, and they were able to shape the natural world around them through the medium of song. Those who had been chosen began to spread the songs to the people, and soon they were all singing together. So this is where the Vahi people came from. Kane wished to see the world filled with song, and it was so. And then about 6,500 first era, so this would be about 8,000 years ago, 8 to 9,000 years ago. Kane wished for his people to have a strong place to live, so he instructed them to build a city on the island of Manalo. If you go and take a look at the map, you can see that is the easternmost island on the map, the smallest one there of the large Vahi Isle chain. Manalo, a holy isle, they considered it. So he instructed his people to build a city on the island of Manalo. They call the city of Manalo too. Somewhat confusing to outsiders, but that's just the way they do it. He found that the people there were living well, so he gathered a new collection of them and taught them how to sail so that they could continue to spread his joy in the song of creation and to learn more. Again, this is that kind of imbuing of a navigator's spirit that he put in them. So he taught a new collection of individuals how to sail, and he named these people the Naui. they became masters of the waves, and they began searching for distant lands and settling them. One of the lands that they settled included the city of Mohana on the southeastern coast of the continent. And that's, you can see it kind of down in a crisscross currently of merlands and cities in the bond of the rising sun. Traditionally, Mohana was a Vahi city, but that changed very recently. We'll cover that a little bit later, though. But the city of Mohana was founded about 3500 First Era, so about 3,000 years after the founding of Manalo, and about 5,000 years before where we are in history today. But then, about 4,000 years ago, from the void left behind at the birth of Kane, it turns out that there was another younger twin brother named Kahawali. Kahawali emerged from the void left behind from the birth, and he sought to undermine his brother's work. He found a few such powerful Vahi that he knew would listen to and be influenced by his selfish words. He named his new group the Maquis, and he took his followers to the mainland and instructed them to live along the southern Finger Islands. So those are all those islands down to the south there. The Maquis, they took over the city of Mohana in 2500 First Era, I believe. Years after the city's founding, it's corrupted by the Maquis, Kahawali's evil followers. One thing to note, too, Kahawali, he came about around 2500 First Era. This was the same time that Veshta, the evil ice queen of the north, appeared. So throughout the almost 10,000 years of the First Era, you have in the same span of 500 years two very evil avatars being born right at the same time. So this was kind of like one of the world's first vacillations back towards evil after Glacia had knocked the Thup on the head and been somewhat subjugated. It's about 2500 or so. And that kind of sets the footprint of the ancient Vahi people and where they would travel to. At least, like, this is going as far back as 2500 First Era. So the dawn of the Second Era, the founding of Honua, that's not going to happen for another 2,500 years after Mohana is corrupted. Another 3,500 years after it's founded. So at least as far as the First Era Vahi, and when we talk about the ancient Vahi, that is kind of the extent of their civilization. The good Vahi live in the east on the ocean, while the evil Vahi live to the south on the Finger Isles. At this point in the First Era, there are only the two cities of the Vahi, Manalo and Mohana. Manalo being the representation of Kane's priesthood and the goodness of the Vahi and their joy of creation, and Mohana to the south being the representation of their willingness to manipulate and goad others into selfish behavior for their own benefit. So shifting then kind of towards the Second Era Vahi, or what we would think is kind of the older Vahi, not necessarily the ancient Vahi, quote-unquote, medieval or Dark Ages Vahi, if you will, because there was a period of Dark Age during the Second Era. But the First Era kind of came and went. As the ages shifted, powers grew and fell, but the Vahi still remained strong. They held fast to their islands as, waves of influence from the west swept over the continent, from both the Thol and the Empire and Veshta and others. They were powerful, so they were all right. There were small groups, though, of Vahi interest that started to sweep back over the continent, you could call them. They were groups that were tired of the isolation in the east and preferred instead to establish themselves like trees around Atheros. And they called themselves the Ikaika. And with Kane's blessing, they began to travel around Atheros in order to fortify the world against the forces of harm. See, when these waves of influence and evil came from the west, a lot of the Vahi were content to stay on the Isles and to resist it and to conserve their culture. But some just did not want that. They saw evil elsewhere, and they thought, this isn't good. We need to spread Kane's love and the joy of creation to others and put an end to this harm that's out there. Those people called themselves the Ikaika, and they are still out there doing that. There would later be a schism between the Ikaika and some of their holier, more island-focused brethren. But that would happen later. The Ikaika, they were founded right around 1500 in the First Era, and then started making different settlements all around Atheros after that point. They were pretty pointedly aggressive in the placement of a lot of their settlements. If you go around the map and you look at the different places that are marked IK, it is no coincidence that those tend to be close to areas of evil influence. They did that very intentionally in order to try to be a bulwark against the forces of harm spreading from there. So that's 1500 First Era. If we move forward about another 1,000 years to 500 First Era, getting pretty close to modern times here. Modern-ish times, anyways, medieval times. Mohana had already been under the sway of the Maquis for a couple thousand years, ruled over by a prince. The continental city ruled itself differently than the island, obviously. They had a prince rather than a priesthood that worshipped Kane. And the priest was consumed by literally consumed by his advisors, who were all working for the Maquis after he would not submit to their evil designs. And they took over the city themselves, forming an evil sort of council, and took it over for their own evil designs, so that they were the ones calling the shots. So there's this evil council in Mohana in 500 First Era. Okay, I want everybody to pay attention to this, because there's a pretty direct timeline here of what happens. The council takes over the city of Mohana for the Maquis and for Kahoali. They consume, literally eat, the prince in an attempt to absorb his power, authority, and influence. Take over the city. But it only takes 500 years. By the turning of the era, 02nd Era now, 2,200 years ago, 2,300 years ago, the Maquis lost control of Honua. So they no longer are the ones calling the shots there. Instead, what happened was, well, they started to relax laws and authority and power so much that they started to lose control of the populace. It became a hotbed for raiders, for scoundrels, for pirates, for scofflaws. And guess what? They scoffed the law. The Maquis, that council that was in control of Mohana, lost control of the city. And they left. So 02nd Era, the evil Maquis council that consumed the Prince of Mohana has to leave the city in fear for their lives so they're not killed by these raider and pirate kings that are moving in. Also in 02nd Era, the city of Honua is founded. A large hub of trade and influence, founded by the Vahi, run by a council, at the mouth of a delta with the Eastern Ocean. Are we seeing any connections here? It's no coincidence that Honua was founded in the aftermath of the destruction of Mohana. The Maquis, there is a reason that they have a say in what goes on in Honua. There's a reason they have a very large stake at the table. It's because some of their counselors were the ones that helped found the consulate over 2,000 years ago. Gasp! Yeah, I know, right? It turns out that not everything is all sunshine, butterflies, and daisies with the consulate. Of course, these are ancient secrets that they do their best to keep buried. There's no connection. They assure people. They even try to make it look like the foundation of Honua dates back from before the fall of Mohana, which is true. The city existed, and then the council moved in and started calling the shots. And the commodity barons were close behind the people that they landed and made rich. So Honua is a city of a lot of compromises. The council there, they realized how much people actually need law. They need order to an extent. And then if they can become expert manipulators of that law and order, then they can much better exploit it while keeping the people in line. So that's more or less the history of the foundation of the consulate and of the civic city-state that would become Honua. Before that, it was just another small Vahi settlement on the coast. So after this time, over the next about 1,500 years, until about 1600 Second Era, we see the Maquis spreading. There's a lot more settlements of evil going around. But we also see the good Vahi spreading out a lot more too, like the Ikaika, for instance. So going ahead to about 600, again, 600 to 1600 Second Era, a lot of monastic camps started to spring up around Atheros, more or less kind of smaller offshoots of the Ikaika. But they didn't necessarily want to be like associated as militaristically, necessarily. But that didn't always happen. The Ikaika were pretty much always viewed as, at least by the ones that they were trying to be a bulwark against, by an aggressive threat. Wouldn't you know it? So the Ikaikan camps are out there training, and over the course of the mid-Second Era, they grow larger and they start to become towns and cities in their own right. And they start to realize, as these foreigners, these non-Vahi, start to move into the Ikaikan camps, they offer unique talents and attributes that the traditional Vahi society did not. They could be stronger together by diversifying their forces. So over time, in the mid-Second Era, you see the Ikaika open their doors to all races and all people, as they realize, hey, we aren't the only ones that want to defend innocence from domination and wickedness. We aren't the only ones that want to stem the tide of harm that is trying to wash over our land. So they open their doors, they open their ranks, and they even begin to train a sect of elite Ikaikans, known as the Order of Justice, who take on some of the biggest, baddest threats that are out there. I mean, these are like the level 16 plus big badasses that go out there and fight Endbringers, take down dragon turtles, that kind of thing. The big boys and girls. Anyways, so the Ikaikans, though, as I said before, they aren't the only ones, they aren't the only Vahi that are interested in the mainland and its people, and not just the Maquis as well. Many different traders started to sail the coast and venture far inland in search of a good deal. So most of these large cities, they'll have a Vahi trading center, like, for example, Honua, and sometimes they'll even have, like Yggdrasil, they'll have clans up unto themselves. Honua is just shy of having clans. the barons try not to allow that to happen, because then that's allowing one baron to become too powerful, but a lot of the barons do have their own private armies and basically are clans and small confederations with themselves, or rather with each other. So as the second era wears on, most Vahi start to forget the songs of creation that their ancestors once sang in the ancient days. But they all still retain the adaptation for sailing, and they can be found trading passage or cargo even along temperate rivers far inland in Atheros, and but more often along the coastlines. It's like just an idea of how the Vahi were spreading out here. I mentioned before, Manala was founded in 6500 First Era, and Mohana was 3500 First Era. That's like the BC, right? We're counting backwards with the years there. Now, at the turn of the era, in 02nd Era, Honua is founded. 300 years later, Anu is founded. And then 1100 years after that, the Tree Camp is founded. And then another 900 years after that, we have the twin cities of Mata and Maka being founded. We also have Hanuamana being founded by the Keepers. We'll get to them in just a second here. So in the second era, we have, within a span of about 2,000 years, 5 major cities of the Vahi being built, in addition to all of the Ikaikan camps that are springing up everywhere. So they are certainly entering an almost colonial renaissance, but because they aren't actually subjugating any of the people where they're going, it's not really true colonialism. A lot of the land is still just empty and unclaimed and there for the taking at this point. And the Vahi are out there taking it. Except for the Ikaika. The Ikaika are definitely doing a little bit of hegemoning. So, as the Vahi generations go by during the second era, and as the Thup did with the Thol, you see the mainland Vahi grow less conservatively religious. You see them, like I said before, a lot of them were forgetting the songs of the ancient ancestors, and now a lot of them were starting to mix with the other races as well. So one sub-race that is definitely worth note when it comes to the Vahi are the Keepers of the Flame. Now, in 02nd Era, if you're keeping track, that's the same year that Mohana fell and Honua was founded by the consulate. An asteroid hit the holy island of Manalo. And miraculously, no one was injured, but from the flames and the embers of the asteroid rose a living god named Ahwahitaroa. He was born there, and he had in his hands his legendary pearls of artifice called Pearls of Ahiatua. They overflowed with power and artifice and magical energy. He, at that point, created a sect within the Vahi, a true sub-race, called the Keepers of the Flame, who assisted him in his works of creating artifice and other great works, and contributing them to all the people of Atheros, mostly the Vahi, but all the people of Atheros. 1,000 years later, so in 1002nd Era, Ahwahitaroa caused the volcano at Manalo to erupt. So this is about 1,300 years ago. And now this is important because this is where all those fishing artifacts come from. All those magic items. Not all of them, but a lot of them anyways. In 1002nd Era, Ahwahitaroa caused Manalo to erupt. And it spewed both the Pearls of Ahiatua and millions of magical items and artifacts all across the land. A lot of them landed in and around the Eastern Ocean. Some of them landed in the Horseshoe Plains as well. So sometimes when you're out there and you're fishing up magic items on the docks, some of those are the ancient artifacts that Ahwahitaroa spewed out of the Isle of Manalo. And there is, in fact, also a priesthood that Ahuhi erected in the aftermath of that event, who were tasked with gathering the pearls of Ahiatua and bringing them back. Arxen in the city, he has one of the pearls. We also know for a fact that Varthus has one of the pearls. But as of now, those are the only confirmed pearl locations that we know of. I'm guessing that some of the followers may still have some. But anyways. So the Keepers of the Flame, again, they are a subrace of Vahi that were granted a divine spark by Ahuhi and charged with the tasks of gathering and protecting his sacred relics. They are functionally ageless, and they're also ever driven for good. Or at least they were, until there was a terrible cataclysm that left them wrecked, wretched, and cursed. The Keepers were plagued by Endbringer attacks, first at the Great Iron Keep, and then again at the city of Honua. We haven't talked about the Cymurg much, but it attacked there, driving the population mad to commit heinous acts. And the Keepers that were left there at the city of Honua that survived became the Shadow Touched. So it's an additional subrace of the Keepers. So the Keepers are not only a subrace themselves, but they even have a subrace. The Shadow, the Keepers who were at Honua and who are now fated to roam Atheros with these ageless immortal bodies that are slowly becoming consumed by darkness. So when we talk about Hunger's Ghasts and his wraiths, these are who we are talking about. It's these Shadow Touched. When they die, their spirits, like Awahi they don't just poof, go and rejoin with Herma. They become these wraiths of hunger, and the things that they kill go and continue to feed hunger and become specters themselves. So this is all like that. All that stuff with the wraiths and the Shadow Touched, it's all lore-based and happened. I assure you. So that's talking about a couple of the sub-races of the Vahi, ones that were created by Awahi and the acts that followed. There's also, however, the Fire Snakes in 2100 Second Era, and this is about like 230 years ago, so this is not that long ago at all. The Vahi who had settled in the Green City, I'll move the map up here a little bit so people can see it. I can select the map. There we go. I'd mentioned before that the Ikaika had a habit of putting themselves around what they viewed as sources of harm or aggressive powers. Here in the Abhan Rainforest, you have Revax, and on two sides, to the west you have the Grass Camp, and to the east you have the Green City. These are both Ikaikan camps that grew into true cities of their own. The Green City, located in the Abhan Rainforest, was home, of course, to many Vahi, but a lot of serpent people who weren't on board with Revax's ideology of enslavement and death and eternal servitude as a zombie, chose to join the city, and of course, as is the natural consequence of intermingling, you have the birth of a subrace. And about 2100 Second Era is when this race, known as the Fire Snakes, were more or less officially recognized by the world. There's likely many like little half sub-races all around Atheros that are so few in number. You're like, okay, there's 50 of them across the continent that, again, beneath notice almost. But the Fire Snakes, they did not number that few, number one. But number two, they also represented an ideological threat to Revax's lichdom. The idea that there could be any serpent people out there that weren't wholly devoted 100% to his authority and would, in fact, like lie with mammals. Gross, okay? He's not a big fan of that. Revax is very anti-Fire Snake. because again, the existence of them might cause the serpent people under his command to start asking questions. Cannot tolerate that. So as he did with the Ator in the Second Era, he called for an extermination of the fire snakes. But times had changed, and the Ikaika were a lot stronger now than they used to be, and they were able to put a stop to a lot of the killing, and to, at the very least, expatriate the fire snakes that were in the Green City out of the Green City. So, kind of a common tale of almost all fire snakes, because of how young so many of them are that you or your parents were born in the Green City, and at some point you were called a Revax. Revax deemed you an abomination, deemed your parents lawbreakers and threats to his lichdom, and sent death squads after you all if you were still in the Green City. The Ikaika were strong, but the rainforest belonged to Revax. A lot of the fire snakes for greener pastures. Those that didn't leave, a lot of them were killed. Not many fire snakes still live in the Green City. I'm just putting that out there straight out. That it's not a friendly place for them, and they know it. The Ikaika still control the Green City, and the Ikaika know that ideologically the fire snakes are the poster child of the Ikaika. We'll get into a little bit more of that in a bit, but the Ikaika certainly like the fire snakes. They're a representation of, hey, here's a people who are considered worthy of death for nothing but the accident of their birth. These are the kind of people that we need to protect. They also happen to draw a lot of fire snakes into their ranks. They took the fire snakes in the Green City, they spread them throughout the continent to be trained in all of the different camps. So again, common story of a fire snake. You grew up in the Green City, or your parents grew up in the Green City, you were considered bad, death squads came after you, and you or your parents trained with the Ikaika your whole life, and you still serve with them. Or you decided to go and see what else life has to offer, but you still have that history with the Ikaika. So they are completely outcast from Serpent Society, the fire snakes are, and even amongst their Vahi brethren, they still find some mistrust. They usually only find solace in really tight-knit family groups or within the Ikaika. That's kind of where they call home. So you have now... I've talked about here this vacillation that occurred over the course of the Second Era, where you have the continental Vahi, like those who are in the Ikaika, growing more concerned with continental affairs than they are the different traditions of the Vahikana and the priesthood of Kane. They are the Vahikana, so there you go. For example, ruling their cities with, chiefs and so forth. They don't do that. They do councils. So you have this growing sort of schism throughout the Second Era. Despite Honua being founded by the Vahi and Mohana being founded by the Vahi and their powerful presence in the Eastern Sea, a lot of the traditional Vahi on the mainland, in their mainland, on their islands, their home islands, they are content to just bicker about politics and religion. They don't really care at all about what's going on the continental mainland. And the same is becoming increasingly true of the Vahi that are on the continental mainland. They, like the Vahi and Honua, they are becoming, after 2,000 years of living in this city with everybody else on the continent, they're so integrated with those local communities that really only a true local or a Vahi expert could tell them apart from just a dark-skinned Bictoral or human or something along those lines, right? They are just becoming so enmeshed in the way they behave, the way they look, the way they act, the way they talk, what they cook, what they eat, the way they work. Like, so many of their traditional Vahi culturalisms have fallen by the wayside. So again, you have this growing cultural schism between the two. And in fact, in the year 2000, in the second era, so this was about 330 years ago, right? In the year 2000, you have a full-on schism in the Ikaika, where the priesthood back on the islands says, you Ikaika are growing too concerned with continental affairs. You're fighting all of these with all of these different people, getting our people killed. We understand protecting the song of creation, but your obsession with commerce seems to really be the driving force behind this, not your obsession with moral law. The Ikaika, have similar things to say about the traditionalists on the islands. That, well, faith is dead without acts, and that if you aren't out there actually putting your sword where your mouth is, you might as well just be one of those navel-gazing thup. So you have this, as I said, schism now, and it's in the Ikaika, and it's strong. To the point where Kane himself steps in the year 2000, and he says, look, Ikaika, priests, quiet it down. We're splitting the Ikaika in two. The Ikaika, who are on the continent, and who are obsessed with stopping slavery and abolition, that's great, I love it, keep at it. You are now your own entity. And the Ikaika, who are here on the islands, on the Holy Isles, who serve as my priesthood, and who are the patrons of our culture, you are now your own group. And you will be called the Vahikana. So in the year 2000, the priesthood to Kane within the Ikaika was split off and became the Vahikana. What started initially really as just a small group of people who were trying to proselytize the love of Kane had now become the dominant faction within the Ikaika, to the point where the priests were cut off and relegated to their own second-hand faction back home. So, you now have almost these three factions within the Vahi. You have the Vahikana, who represent Kane's law, Kane's word, Kane's moral law. You have the Ikaika, who represent his military arm in going out there and protecting not only the Vahi, but also the other free peoples of the land from domination and wickedness. And then you have the Maquis, who are into spreading the domination and the wickedness. So that happens in 2000 second era. Then in 0 third era, okay, which is 2200 second era. So 0 third era, 2200. If you ever want to figure out a third era year, just add 2200 to it, 2200, and you're set. Okay, so in the year 200, 200 years after the creation officially of the Vahikana, they institute a series of moral laws throughout Manalo, and they codify them as well. So this is the beginning of the Vahi starting to vacillate back the other way. They're starting to become a little bit more traditionalist now, right? They spent the whole second era becoming more involved with continental politics. Now they're starting to go back towards the old traditional ways, thinking, hey, these things aren't necessarily so bad. Up to this point in 0 third era, there was no real common law across all of the islands of the Vahi, besides, the priesthood stepping in sometimes if something bad was happening. Otherwise, the chiefs were really the ones calling the shots within the tribes of the islands. But now, finally, there was actually a pretext for some sort of federal power, and we'll see that here coming up very soon, as the moral laws of Manalo were codified in 0 third era. 30 years later, it turns out that the Maquis are not done in Mohana. The Maquis and Kahoali, they still control Mohana, or not like completely control, but they still have a lot of power down there. and they start making deals with a devil named Ism to get more power in Mohana. They remember the glory days, and they want to go back to those days. They want to control the city again. Well, it doesn't take long. 40 years later, the devil that they're working with fools them. Fooled you! And takes over Mohana for themselves, sacrifices 80 and then turns the people that were evil who died. There's lots of evil people in Mohana. Turn the evil ones into an undead revenant army. And this revenant army starts to go around. You see the ruins of Algo to the south there. This revenant army is why they are ruins. They spent the next 15 years going around, causing all sorts of mayhem, mucking about. The Maquis, again, they sought power, and they totally lost control of the situation. The people of Mohana again paid the price, as did the people of Algo. It took 15 years before the city was fully purified in 85 Third Era. An allied force of Nair and Mur, I guess those are Nur, or Mare, whatever. Anyways, Nair and Mur allied forces took the city of Mohana, they cleansed it, they purified it, they killed and burned the deviled spawn. There's a reason there's no tieflings in Atheros. We don't talk about it. So that occurs right now at the beginning of the Third Era. You have the Maquis, who are a criminal organization of Vahi, again, trying to take over Mohana, more than continental affairs. And who pays the price for this greed? The people of Mohana, of course. Lots of people died. And the Vahi remember this. They have long memories. So, it doesn't take long now before the Ikaika get themselves into trouble. Things are starting to heat up in the west with their war with the Empire, and it's no secret that the Ikaika are losing the war. In 110 Third Era, the city of Grimming, you can see it there to the north of the Dwarven Holds and beneath Thup's Grin, kind of near the center of the map where we are. The city of Grimming, it was held by the Ikaika, but under siege by the Empire for years. Well, the Vahi in the east decided, we have to go out there. We need to save our Ikaikan brothers and sisters. The Ikaikan hero Valiapep, a fire snake who was the de facto leader of the Ikaika, was even there at Grimming in the siege. So the Ikaika led a recruitment effort and raised 3 legions, 3 whole of Vahi from Honua and from the east. And they marched to Grimming in 110 Third Era in an effort to save the besieged Ikaikans. The Imperials had already surrounded the city and built fortifications around it. The Oglela from Yggdrasil were the first to charge in, but they fell to a line of spears held by the Imperial Slave Legion. And the 3 Vahi armies rushed in next, but they were no match for even one Imperial army. Trained, better equipped, higher morale, ready for war. The Vahi couldn't take battling all day. They began to grow fatigued. The Ikaika saw this and realized it was now or never and tried to break out of the city. They succeeded in doing so. Valiapet broke out with a handful of officers. Teodros was one of them. But besides maybe 100 of those folk, none of the Ikaikans inside the city survived. And after an entire day of fighting, the 3 Vahi armies were exhausted, and the rest of the Imperials moved in. And the Vahi, rather than suffer as slaves at the hands of the Glacians, they took their own lives. So 3 legions of Vahi. This is 21 years ago from where we are right now. So this might have been one of your uncles if you're a Vahi. 21 years ago, 3 legions of Vahi marched on Grimming to try to break the Ikaika out. Only Valaya escaped with a handful of officers. All 3 legions perished. Basically no survivors. We're talking 90 to 95% casualties. So the Vahi, after Grimming, after that total loss, the survival of Valaya is the only win that you could possibly spin out of it. After that, the Vahi were starting to grow upset with the Ikaika. The Vahi at large. They understood that, initially the Ikaika was a Vahi organization, and it stood for the ideals of Kane. But at what cost? It seemed like at this point the Ikaika were doing nothing but warmongering and drawing aggression from other hostile forces and causing wars when there wouldn't normally be one. And now, thousands of Vahi killed in their prime for the Ikaika, for 100 men and women. Is that really a worthwhile trade? There's a lot of Vahi who don't think so. Well, 5 years later, there's an organization on Manalo called the City Committee that was founded. And remember how I said that in 030, or about 115 years ago, that the moral laws of Manalo were codified. Those laws were now drawn on to create an actual constitution for all of the Vahi people, all of the Vahi Isles. The people on the mainland, they're doing their own thing. But the City Committee realizes, you know what? The Vahikana do a good job of protecting our moral laws and our priesthood, but we need some kind of civic and cultural infrastructure here to make sure that our traditions are being protected and that the Ikaika aren't just leading our people into absolute destruction. And they're still a very young and nascent organization, but they have already done a lot insofar as reviving old cultural traditions that were on the verge of dying out. So you have now, about 10 or 15 years ago, within the Vahi, right as the Glacian War is ending, so right as Glacia is defeated and Varthus sues for peace with the rest of the continent, the City Committee takes control of the Vahi Isles, the islands that are out there, and they begin a cultural renaissance. Again, this is all pretty much happening on the islands. The homeland as it exists, and as it is becoming more so now, they're almost re-radicalizing, re-conservatizing themselves. They exist so much as an ideal that a lot of the Vahi mainlanders, they would be really shocked to see how actually still strict and devout the islands remain. They are not driven by commerce. They are not driven by these councils. They are still ruled wholly by these moral laws. They didn't have any sort of civic law infrastructure until 10 or 15 years ago when the City Committee stepped in and said, okay, we're going to be doing this now. Up until then, they really were living out there as just like this, still trying to maintain the golden age just through belief alone. But with the departure of Kane, the City Committee realized that they needed to step in. So, it should be noted too that the tribal allegiances between all Vahi are still strong. If the Vahi and Honua heard that there was some attack, like the Crimson King had declared war on the Vahi Isles and he was sending a defense force to go and attack Manalo, Honua would start pulling strings to get that attack force quashed real fast. They still have a lot of love for each other. Even if the Vahikane think that the Ikaika are a little misguided and kind of warmongery right now, they still love each other. So that's pretty much everything from ancient to recent history. Talking about now then how Ikaikan society actually is, and we're right on the end of it here, don't worry. Alright, so not Ikaika Society, sorry, Vahi Society. So as the Vahi expanded on the mainland, they more or less formed a loose association of city-states. Each of those states was entirely self-governed, though it was still expected to live up to cultural obligations of Kane or Vahikane. The Vahikana, and then more recently the city committee as well. And these would be like the pretty much predominantly Vahi cities. So not necessarily Honua, but other smaller island cities that are throughout the chain, or other smaller cities that are on the continent, near the islands. So most cities that still follow the traditional rule are led by a single chief, and that chief more or less is the one that oversees and organizes the social classes and civic matters, right? So again, there's no real law, but there is the precedent of the chief and of previous chiefs. But until the codification of the moral law, official law, and there still isn't really an official civic law, the city committee is working on it. So the counterpart of the chief, then, who oversees the civic matters of the cities, is the high priest. The high priest oversees and organizes religious matters. And as you might guess, the high priest and the chief are often at odds with each other because they have competing agendas. And there are several Vahi cities that have stagnated slightly due to those internal power struggles. Again, you kind of see that same schism playing itself out within the Ikaika when they had to be fractured into the Vahikane and the Ikaika. By contrast, at least the ones that are more commercial, like Mohana and Honua, they are less steeped in the old governance, chiefs and priests and so forth. Usually they're run by locally elected councils of various forms, usually predominantly Vahi, but as is the case of Honua, only 2 of the 5 members are traditionally Vahi. And civic and religious debates still usually run strong within the community, and the ability to influence different council members is quite common. And again, it's not as traditional and hard set of moral laws where the chief says, well, this is the way that the chiefs have always done it, tough luck. The councils can be upset and overturned in the course of just a couple of years, as they gain and lose influence due to petty things in politics. And then as for there's other smaller Vahi villages around as well, and they usually depend on their nearest largest city for survival, and they're almost always under the governance of that dominant ideology as well. So again, if there were some small Vahi villages right outside the high seas around Honua, they would likely be more in line with the Honuan council structure. Whereas if there were some on the northeastern peninsula near the Shastani Mountains and the actual Vahi Isles there, even though it's a continental city, its proximity to the Isles means that it might actually still worship, they might still practice the old ways. And then finally, institutions. The Vahikane, pretty obviously, by this point anyways, they represent the priesthood of Kane. They were the ones who were responsible for codifying Manala's moral laws. Any civic institutions outside the priesthood committee are non-extant, as the Vahi just generally believe individual communities are responsible for their own internal well-being, and that people should have those freedom of consequences and of free will, like the people of Mohana. You want to go off and do that, that's okay, that is your business, we will let you do that. The Ikaika disagree, but again, they're not necessarily in line with the Vahikane there. And again, the recent exception to this would be the city committee, founded in the aftermath of the Glacian War and the loss of all those Vahi lives to the Ikaika's war effort. The city committees, that legalized confederation of different city-states and islands with a joint constitution and directives that represent all of the Vahi city-states. They're currently serving as a pseudo-federal government. They standardize laws and trade across Vahi civilization in the growing absence of Kane. As far as schools, various orders will run schools themselves, but there's no real public school for the Vahi. The Naui, their navigators, they have their own school, as do the Vahikane. The Ikaika handle training at their camps. But as far as schools within the city-states themselves, it's understood that the self-contained kind of raise the children as they see fit. Again, it's sort of a community schooling. You run your affairs. As long as you don't disturb the larger social harmony, raise the kids as you will. So yeah, that's about everything for this Vahi lore talk. Yes, kept it at about an hour. That's good. Are there any quick questions from people before we close?
Yes. What is the current era that we're in?
Okay, so the question was, what is the current era that we're in? That is a great question. I believe the year is currently 132. I think we just turned the year over. Let me double check that. Yes, it is currently 132 in the third era. So the city committee that was founded 12 years ago, Honua was founded 2,312 years ago. Or sorry, yeah. About that.
Okay, no, my question actually was the PE and the other one. I was trying to figure out how to do the year dates for them.
Oh, sure, yeah. So, first era starts way back. That's more or less like BC. It starts, I think, at 9,000, and it counts down to 0. Once you get to 0 third era,
okay,
that is also the same as 0 second era, and then the years start counting up from there. They count up until you get to 2,200 second era. That is also, that year, 0 third era. So 2,200 second era is 0 third era. Or, for example, right now it is 132 third era. So it would be 2,332 second era. Again, I'm just adding 2,200 to that 132. So third era, it counts up just like second era does. It's just that it takes over in 2200. Okay, any more questions?
This might be a weird question, but what would a Vahi do if they were to stumble upon a Pearl of Power?
Geez, if a Vahi were to stumble upon a Pearl of Power, I would say it depends on the disposition. I'll give like 3 really quick things. Like first, right? If they're a good, devout, Kane following NPC, they're going to find the nearest priest that they can and deliver it to them. They might not be able to find a keeper because they're so rare and enigmatic, but they would at least try to find a priest of Vahikane. They would know what to do with it, which would probably be to find a keeper. If it was someone who had more of an evil bent, they, like an NPC again, they might try to sell it. Just find somebody to sell it to, get some great power, especially if they think that selling it to that person is going to cause a lot of mischief. Like Awahi Taroa did, putting one in Varthas' armor. The third route, and this is kind of that adventuring motivation player character route, you might think to yourself, well, what could I do with this? You might find out that if you collect enough of the pearls that you can get a wish. So it could spawn some sort of like Dragon Ball Z type quest where, oh, I found one of the pearls, I'm going to go try to find 4 more so that I can get a wish. that kind of thing. So those would I'd say be probably what a Vahi would do. If they're devout, they turn it over to a priest. If they're more self-oriented, they might try to sell it, especially to cause some mischief. Or if they're kind of a more learned, adventurous type, they might try to figure out what they can do with it and then find out that you can get a wish. All right, is that good?
Well, that answers my question.
All right, excellent, perfect. All right, any other questions? Give it a few more seconds here in case someone's having trouble with their mute.
What would a non-Vahi do with a pearl of power? I was having trouble.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, I get it. That's why I give it time. A non-Vahi, geez. They would have to make an Arcana check. I'd say most Vahi probably just innately kind of know the tale of Ahuitroa and the pearls. A non-Vahi, once they found out what it was, I'd say it'd probably just be more in line with, like, I hate to say the negative character motivation, but the selfish character motivation. But that's just because they might be ignorant of what it does. There might also be the option of, like, I did mention the keeper thing. If you were a non-Vahi, you might think to yourself, oh, geez, Ahuitroa used this and he made a bunch of artifice. I wonder if I could do that same thing. Again, trying to, like, capitalize on the power. I think a lot of natural Vahi would know that that's bad, because that's what led to the Keeper's downfall. Like, the Vahi, like, they have a reverence of the pearls, they venerate their power, but with great power comes great responsibility, right? And everybody's humanoid, everybody makes mistakes. So it's that Vahi natural wisdom that they have that tells them, this might not be good for me to mess with, or I'll give it to the priest. But a non-Vahi, they might be arrogant enough to try to actually use it for their own gain, like Varthus did. And like Arxen does. I mean, Arxen, he's a non-Vahi, he's got a pearl, but he keeps it stored in a box to fuel magic experiments. He basically just uses it as a power source, which was its intended purpose. So like he is doing that, right? He's a non-Vahi and he's using it for his own benefit. Varthus is a non-Vahi and he's using the pearl for his own benefit. That tends to be what the non-Vahi do. The Vahi want to put them in a museum, right? They're meant to be protected by the keepers. A non-Vahi would think, well, hey, just think of great power. What is power if not meant to be used?
So, if a historian that's a non-Vahi were to come across it and they were to understand its value, they do more of a natural Vahi reaction. But if you were, let's say, I don't know, a dwarf who has no idea what it is, you'd probably try to use it for yourself.
I would think so, yeah. And I mean, even Arxen Daxon, who's a scholar extraordinaire, even he found it and still decided to use the pearl for himself. So you would have to really be a historian of great moral rectitude to want to respect the Vahi's wishes and not use it for yourself. Because keep in mind, being a historian, knowing things about someone else's culture doesn't necessarily mean that you do respect it. So I would say that, yeah, it might be more likely for a historian if that's their profession, right? Because likely they got involved with that sort of thing because they care about other people's cultures. Versus, yeah, if you were a dwarven, like, say you're a dwarven mine boss, right? You've got like 3,000 people who work under you, and someone digs up one of these things in a ravine underground. Yeah, you might think, hey, I could use this to power one of my generators or something like that. If you fail that Arcana check. If you fail that Arcana check, it seems like a super, like a legendary level Pearl of Power. If you look in the DMG and the magic items, there's the Pearl of Power, but I think it can only restore like a spell slot up to a certain level. This would be able to restore like 9th level spell slots or 7th level spell slots. It's a legendary Pearl of Power. So yeah, most people, you cast that Identify on it. You know, if you cast Identify, you're going to find out that it's an incredibly strong Pearl of Power. You cast Legend Lore, you'll find out that it's one of the Pearls of Ahiatua.
So it all comes down to whether or not you're playing lawful good or lawful evil.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, alignment often has a lot to do with character decision, alignment and knowledge in this case. I'd say that's more or less what it would break down to. How much knowledge do you have of the Pearl, and what's your personal inclination towards power?
Well, that is satisfied the archaeologist in me.
Good. Yeah, and like most, the power of this thing is not difficult to access or harness. You even a mundane person would hold it in their hands and feel the incredible magic aura coming off of it, see the glow, know this thing they would know it's a magic item of some kind at the very least. Probably suspect that it might even be divine, because it's got that sort of Ahuahitoan divine glow, like the Keeper's Eyes did before they, lost that power.
So if, for instance, and this is going to be a bit of a joking thing.
Sure.
You created a level 1 peasant, like he has 1 HP and everything, but his primary item that gave him power was one of these pearls. Would that be a viable thing, or would it corrupt him entirely?
That's a good question. I would say mechanically, there's nothing about the pearl that would corrupt you. Like, there's no inherently cursed trait with it. The question might be, and I've seen this happen with players, you hand someone a powerful magic item at level 1, and they think they're invincible, and they bite off more than they can chew. If you're a first level wizard, and it's like, ooh, I've already got my arcane recovery, but now I can use this too to get another spell slot back. I'm invincible. So the own person's pride and arrogance might get them killed, especially knowing how powerful of an item it is, but it itself does not unnaturally corrupt in any way. The pearl, Ahuahitoroa did get corrupted, that is true, but the pearl itself is pure divine source of energy.
So basically, it takes a really good person to not be corrupted by the amount of power it gives, but it itself is kind of very not evil.
Yes, exactly. Yes, precisely.
Alright, just the last thing. Would anything that could happen with the pearls cause somebody to end up getting that kind of egotisticalism and somehow fall into the main character syndrome thing?
I would say 100% yes. There was a time in our game where, in one of the original games that we had for Atheros, where the players needed a magical power source, but fortunately they had Arxen on their side. So they were able to use that power source in order to power their airship. Basically, there's only 3 airships on all of Atheros because there is nothing powerful enough to power an airship except one of those meteorites. Well, they took a chance on a Pearl of Power. Sorry, not on a Pearl of Power, but on a Pearl of Ahiatua, and it turns out that it worked. So they were able to actually fly and pilot this airship around There's only 3 airships on the entire continent, and now you have one. It's definitely player character level shenanigans. There's also Varthus. I mean, he was beaten, destroyed, lost the use of his body. He was a husk, like commoner stats husk, right? But with the power suit that he has, powered by the Pearl of Ahiatua, he is now an unstoppable avatar again. In the suit, he is a force of pure rage that has harnessed the civic power of the Terran Empire for his own benefit. And nothing can stand in his way. But if he didn't have that pearl powering his suit, he would be, again, like commoner stats. Nothing. He'd be a commoner with 18 charisma, and that's about it. Okay, he's maybe got like 20 charisma. But even so. That's the point I'm trying to make, is yes, it is certainly possible that you would find a Pearl of Ahiatua and you would think to yourself, oh, this would fit into my player character scheme for this or for that. I mean, even avatars desire these.
So basically, he can still be defeated by a peasant cannon.
Yes. Oh, yes. He just has to be out of his suit. I mean, he could be defeated by a cat.
The idea of taking out a godly entity with the peasant cannon satisfies me entirely.
Just get him out of his armor. There you go. All right. Any more questions?
I got a quick question.
Yeah.
If you were to ingest the power suit and like eat it, what would happen?
Eat you from the inside out, and you would probably die. I don't know, or you would just pass it and be fine. I don't think so. It would probably irradiate you, and you would die. Yeah, I would not consider eating the Pearl of Ahiatua a form of attunement. All right, anything else?
Yeah, I think they're muted from my end as well. I don't hear them anymore.
Oh.
I thought my mic just broke.
A similar thing to what you were saying about ingesting. Some Warforges can take items into their body too, and I'm curious about that.
Oh, yeah. So, the Warforged are not in Atheros, but if just theoretically say that it could happen, right? Because Ahuitaroa is a god of artifice. He could have made something along those lines. I'll just come out and say it now. We intentionally had an out-of-game discussion during the Dawn of Worlds about Warforged or about other living races of artifice, and we decided that we didn't want to include those, and that was actually part of the whole downfall of the Keepers and Ahuitaroa.
I would believe that happened.
Yeah, so like it like could it happen? Yes, it's certainly possible that you could possibly find some way to integrate it into your body and to not.
Sucks because Corona and all, you know.
Yeah.
Well, I just got home from work, so I really feel that.
Yeah. All right.
I had to skip out work 2 days because of a COVID test.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and call the Lore Chat here then. We'll leave Hangout for
My manager
Hangout.
scheduled me for work despite me having COVID, so I'm having a real blast.
I'll talk to y'all later.
Isn't that